Hey everybody, how are you? How was your weekend? My name is Stephanie. Welcome to Get Ready With Me and Talk About Stuff. And this is probably going to be my last video for 2020, so let's make it great. What do you say? How was your holiday last week? If you celebrated Christmas, as I did you have a nice Christmas? Did you get everything you wanted? I did. I got time with my family. Everybody had fun. No complaints. It was just a good time. And yeah, that's what I want. And it was nice to see everybody. It's not often that we've been able to get together, especially this year. And I just enjoyed being able to see everybody all at once. That said, I'm always happy to go back to the quiet solitude of my existence. So that was my Christmas. Now here we are, approaching the end of 2020, and I thought it would be a great time to talk about the good and the bad and everything in between for this year, because this has been a heck of a year, hasn't it? I don't think that when January 1st, 2020 rolled around, we had any idea at all what we were in for. No idea whatsoever. And the longer the year went on, the more I felt really bad for any way whatsoever that I complained about 2019, because 2019 was like a dream compared to what 2020 became. So I'm going into 2021 with I wouldn't say low expectations, but I will say that I am maybe tempering my expectations a little bit, because I'm not about to set myself up for another heavy dose of some harsh reality. So I will just keep my expectations at bay for 2021 is what I'm getting at. So let's do a little review of what 2021 gave us. Now, it seems like a lifetime ago now, but do you remember in January of this year when the United States almost went to war with Iran? Do you remember that? It seems like it's so long ago now, and it almost seems quaint to think about at this point, but yes, do you remember that for a few days, Donald Trump was indicating that he was willing to go to war with Iran, and everybody was rightfully worried. And then at the very last minute, he was like, just kidding. And he does, he does that all the time. That's kind of his thing. But that was how he started this year. And I remember at the time thinking, well, I'm glad that's over. Nothing else that wild could happen this year, right? Oh, we were so wrong. So as the weeks progressed, everybody's carrying on as usual. Kids are in school, enjoying being with their friends after the holidays. Everything seems good. And then we find out that there is a deadly virus sweeping across the globe, and all of a sudden life changes. And I remember when the kids were the word came out that we were going to start, kids were going to be learning at home. And back in the spring, do you remember how wild that was? Because there really was no plan in place for distance learning at the time. People were really just doing the best they could with what they had, because most schools had no notice at all, no means of preparing for this whatsoever. They just were like, the powers that be were just, one day everything was business as usual, and then the next day it was, oh, by the way, starting next Monday, you're going to be doing distance learning with all your students. So if you could put something together, that would be great. And it was just a weird time. And I remember just how odd it felt. Trying to make sense of what was going on. And, it was supposed to be a short-lived thing. 2 weeks, I remember. 2 weeks. And we were told if everybody stays home and does their part for 2 weeks, then we can contain this and everything can go back to as it was before this happened and everything will be fine. Well, you know what we found out? We found out that there are a lot of people who don't want to be inconvenienced whatsoever, even for the short time of 2 weeks. And 2 weeks stretched into a month, and then it became 2 months, and then 3 months. And here we are, I think it's 9 months later, and we're still trying to keep it manageable. And I think that one thing that I learned through the pandemic, and as the pandemic carried on and on and on and on and on, is people are unbelievably selfish. And I was really discouraged to learn that. You know, it was a severe disillusionment for me, because I've always been somebody who wants to give people the benefit of the doubt. I want to trust that people have good intentions. And as this pandemic unfolded and we realized it was not going to be over anytime soon, and the reason it wasn't going to be over anytime soon is because there were people who just felt that they did not need to follow the guidelines, that, you know, the people who were following them were nothing more than sheep, and, you know, only sheep would listen to somebody telling them how they can live their lives, and they were not going to do that. And because of that, the 2-month lockdown period stretched into several months, and then here we are. Now, I remember when the first protests happened in Michigan, the first Open Up Michigan, or what do they call it? Liberate Michigan. The Liberate Michigan protest happened at the Capitol. And this was only like 2 or 3 weeks into what would become our normal for 2020. And first I thought, wow, that's all it took to break us, was 2 weeks. That's really sad. If we ever were the target of another country, and they wanted to absolutely bring us to our knees, all they'd have to do is inconvenience us slightly, and they would be able to have complete control, because we learned very quickly that there are a lot of people who cannot stand the idea of being even mildly inconvenienced. So if there are any world powers out there who are wondering what the key is to defeating the United States, it's inconvenience us. Anyway, I remember when the first protest happened in Lansing, and I was so angry. I was angry because, and not only because people were blatantly disregarding the guidelines to have this protest, but the first protest was a gridlock protest, so they were interrupting the flow of traffic, preventing people from living their lives the best that they could. There were still people who had to get to work. There were still emergency vehicles on the road, etc. And people still thought that the best way to get their point across was to gridlock traffic. But what really bothered me, and still bothers me when I think about it, is that these people who were staging this protest in Lansing had nothing to say about the impact the pandemic was having until it affected them personally. They did not care that up to that point, the people affected by it most were people of color, primarily the black community in Detroit. This is for Michigan. I don't know how it played out elsewhere. They didn't care. They did not care until it started impacting their lives personally, and then all of a sudden it was just an outrage. They didn't care that there had already been thousands of deaths in the Metro Detroit area. They didn't care that people in Metro Detroit were having curfews and having restrictions on their liberties because of the virus. They didn't care. It didn't become an issue in Michigan, anyway, until it started affecting white people. And it was so blatantly obvious to me that I remember getting on Facebook that day, and I recorded a video and posted it on Facebook that day about how angry I was because the racism involved in the Liberate Michigan and Liberate other places protests were entirely, I mean, they were extremely racist. And I don't think that if you were to look at the way events unfolded, I don't think there's really any way around that. There was a strong racist element to the demand that things be opened up. And we learned that a lot of people cannot stand the idea of going without certain conveniences for very long, like haircuts, the ability to sit down at a restaurant and have dinner with a friend or family anytime you wanted to. I mean, take those things away. I know people are going to get mad, but people dying from a virus, who cares, as long as it doesn't affect them. And unfortunately, that was an attitude that continued to play out for the rest of this year. I really thought, I remember thinking at one point that, you know, as more people die, eventually these protesters will get it. They will see that this is not a game, that the things they are screaming and shouting about are irrelevant in comparison to people actually losing their lives. I really thought for a very brief time that people would come around, but they never did. A lot of them still to this day, despite over 300,000 deaths from the virus here in the United States, they still believe it's a hoax. So this year for me has been very disheartening, and I'm sure it has for a lot of people. Not only has life, you know, the way we live our lives been altered entirely, but we're learning things about people that we didn't know were there. We are learning that people that we respected, that we maybe even admired and genuinely liked, were harboring some incredibly horrible ideas that we didn't become aware of until this happened. And then once you've seen that in someone, you can't really unsee it. Once you see the ugliness they've allowed into their soul, and once that's bubbled to the surface, it's really hard to look past that. And for me, 2020 has been a very hard lesson, or not really, it's been a very hard task to see people, you know, to not dehumanize people who are treating this virus so callously. Even though I firmly believe they dehumanize others when they do that, I do not want to dehumanize them because I don't want to take that on for myself. That's not a burden I want. So 2020 has been a challenge for me to avoid dehumanizing people who, frankly, are out of touch with reality and just live in their own little world. And that is a job. I mean, that's like a full-time job. And anyone who's in the same boat as I am knows. It's especially hard, I think, for people who were raised as I was in the white evangelical community. And we learned all of our lives about the importance of loving your neighbor as you love yourself, of caring for the least of these, of preferring others above yourself, of being willing to set yourself and your own ambitions and needs and so forth aside so that you can help people who are less fortunate than you, or maybe don't have the same opportunities you do and so forth. We were taught all of that. We were told that those were things to aspire to as far as what kind of people we wanted to be. So when I see footage or photos of people carrying their Bibles in one hand and their Liberate Michigan or whatever signs in the other, it's really a hard thing for me to process. And I am still not very good at it. It's painful for me. because I feel like they're taking something that should be a source of hope for people. Even if you don't necessarily believe in Jesus in terms of being a savior from sin, he still taught a lot of things about, you know, what we can do as individuals to make the world a better place for everyone, even, quote, the least of these. So when I see people of the white evangelical persuasion, and yes, I am specifying white because most of the time, people of color who identify as evangelical also have a strong sense of community. And I think this is especially true within the Black evangelical community. There is a much stronger sense that their behavior impacts other people. And so they need to behave responsibly and respectfully and in such a way that their community, not just their house, not just their lives, not just, you know, things that are immediately connected to them, but their entire community benefits from, or at least is not harmed by, their actions. And I don't see that in the white evangelical church. It wasn't true when I was growing up, and from what I can see, it's certainly not true now. The white evangelical church are the, you know, that's the group that gave us Donald Trump, and for that I will never fully forgive them. But so we had the pandemic hit the United States. Everything started changing, and we started seeing a lot of the weaknesses that exist within the structures we accept as normal. And I think that was really driven home in June when the Black Lives Matter marches and protests began in response to the brutal, unnecessary murder of George Floyd. And it had been, you know, it came immediately on the heels of the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. Well, not the murder of him, people becoming aware of the murder months after it happened. So back to back, and then we had Breonna Taylor. So back to back to back, we had several people killed, making headlines. And every time you read a headline about a person of color, specifically Black, who falls victim to violence, be it from a cop or a retired cop, as I believe was the case with Ahmaud Arbery, you know that there is not likely to be justice. And I think that with, you know, between the pandemic and the stresses it brought and the awareness that, you know, justice was not likely to be served in any of these cases, I think it was a tipping point. And the streets exploded with protests and marches. And, of course, as is their custom, you know, white supremacists use that as a vehicle for committing terrible acts, terrible atrocities, with looting and rioting and so forth, knowing that the Black community would be blamed. But if you look at it, if you look at what happened, more often than not, it was white supremacists committing those acts. And that's an important thing, because to this day, months after the fact, there are still a lot of people who believe that it was Black Lives Matter who was starting fires and looting and so forth, when that wasn't the case at all. And it's important to set the record straight there, because whatever issues you might have with Black Lives Matter, to say that people who adhere to the notion, who use the slogan, that's what I'm trying to say, who use that slogan, are the people responsible for the destruction of property and the theft of property. And that just simply isn't true. In most cases, that's not even, it's not true in the least. So I think that this year has just been very hard. And I think one of the things that we've learned this year is we got some problems that we need to deal with. I do think people are feeling hopeful because in just a few short weeks, we're going to be swearing in a new president and a new vice president, and I think people are hopeful that it will be the beginning of some meaningful changes to, restore America. But here's the thing. The things that brought us to the place that we're in 2020 don't go away just because we elect a new president. And we got to get real about that. We have to, because the only way we're going to make meaningful progress in the things that we say are important to us are to get real about the problems we have in this country with racism, with income disparity, with the growing divide between the rich and the poor, with lack of opportunities faced by some, while some people have more opportunities than they even know what to do with. There are a lot of things that we need to face, and they're not going to go away just because we're swearing in a new president in January. And unless we get honest about that, and I've mentioned this on my in my videos and in my podcast many times, unless we get honest about the roots of these problems and the pervasiveness of these problems, they're never going to be really fixed, because you can't really address a problem that you're not willing to be honest about and face head on. And I feel that even with the marches this summer and the bumper stickers and the t-shirts and everything that people are sporting, and BLM in their profiles on Twitter and so forth, even with all of that, unless we can get honest about the fact that this country in the very beginning was never necessarily intended to be free for everyone, and that intention bore fruit and continues to bear fruit today, we're not going to make real progress, because we're not being honest. We have set up the founders as these morally superior, divinely guided people who couldn't have possibly set the foundation for something that couldn't withstand the progress of the progress made in civil rights and so forth. And the truth of the matter is, a lot of the mechanisms put in place by the founders were intended to prevent the very progress that now threatens what the founders put in place. And we have to get real about that. We have to. And I think that one thing that this year has shown me is that there are a lot of conversations that America needs to have that America is just not ready for. We say we are. A lot of people say we are. A lot of the, quote, woke crowd says, they say we're ready to talk about this, but are we? Because evidence suggests we're not. Because we still can't have an honest conversation about the roots that we sprung from and what that means and what that might mean regarding what needs to happen in order to facilitate meaningful change. So 2020 in so many ways showed us the very worst of humanity. We learned that there are a lot of people who will refuse to be inconvenienced, even if it means other people die. We had government leaders in various states, even the president himself, implying it would be better to just let the old and the sick and the disabled and the marginalized communities die so that everyone else can go carry on with their lives than it is to take precautions so that as many people survive this pandemic as possible. We've learned that there are a lot of people who think that way. And what strikes me is that there are a lot of people who think that way, who also in the next breath will tell you they are pro-life. And this is a real sticking point with me. I have been called a monster. I've been called a baby murderer. I've been told that my own child should not even exist because I'm pro-choice. I have been called the spawn of Satan for being pro-choice. I've been called a lot of things. And I know people who have endured much worse than just being called names because of not only being pro-choice, but also being an abortion provider or an escort at a clinic. Yet, the very people lobbing those insults and making those threats are the same people who fought the hardest against guidelines that were designed to preserve as much life as possible. The irony is not lost on me, and I hope it's not lost on anybody who's paying attention. I have believed for a number of years that the pro-life movement is anything but pro-life. It's pro-control. It's pro-fetus. It is pro-virtue signaling, but it is not pro-life. And I've never been more convinced of that than I was this year. And I didn't start this video with the intention of going off about these things. I just kind of start the videos on any day, on any topic, and just kind of see where it goes. And this is where it went. So if the political aspect of what I'm talking about bothers you, I'm sorry, but you're welcome to go start your own channel. I think we have to talk about these things because the reality is, as I've said multiple times now, these things don't go away just because we turn the page on the calendar or we elect a new president. It doesn't go away just because we have a new administration coming in. And the notion of a new year is just a line in the sand. It's not really, it's an illusion. It gives us a sense of closure for the difficult things that we faced in 2020 and a sense that we can start all over again in 2021. Now, my hope is that if people really believe that, then they will take advantage of that and decide that rather than being angry about the things we learned about ourselves and our country and our biases and just the general ugliness of the world, instead of being angry about that people will use it as a catalyst for creating the world that they want to live in. 2020 showed us a lot about ourselves and a lot about each other and a lot about the world that we share. And, if we're being honest, not all of those things are great. But 2020 gave us the gift of seeing with clarity, if we're willing to. And by bringing attention to these things, it gives us the opportunity for a reset if we want it. And I hope that we do. I hope that all of the upset that people are expressing over the way things have been, the things that have been revealed in 2020, I hope it's enough that as 2021 comes in, that the same people who are angry about the things they learned about themselves and their neighbors and their world and what kind of a place we've created, I hope they're bothered enough to want to actually do something about it. Because it's easy to be upset by the things we've learned. It's easy to say, the virus got out of control because we had irresponsible people in office. Well, who put them in office? It's easy to say, we have a terrible president, and because he's so terrible and hates so many people, he's given permission for others to be hateful and to act on that hate. Well, that is true. I'm not going to argue with that. But what are we going to do? What are we going to do as this year ends and a new one begins? What kind of changes are we willing to make? And I think especially for people who are in places of privilege, whether that's wealth privilege, education privilege, white privilege, whatever it might be, The question also becomes, what are we willing to sacrifice to make this world the kind of world that we want it to be? And if the answer to that is nothing, that's fine if that's your honest answer, but also realize that means nothing is going to change, because the changes that need to take place, the things we became aware of this year are not going to go away unless people are willing to give up something to make that happen. Because if we try to hold on to what we have and also at the same time expect the radical changes that need to take place to just happen magically somehow, we're not being really honest with ourselves, and we're definitely not facilitating the kind of changes we need to see in the world. So when I look at 2021, that is where my mind goes. I'm not a big believer in resolutions. I don't do them. I want to leave myself open for improvement and growth all year long, not just at the new year. So all year long, I'm setting goals and I'm working toward self-improvement. But if I did have to pick one thing to work toward in 2021, it would definitely be to be the change that I want to see in the world. Because it's easy to get mad about stuff. And it's easy to place the blame. It's much harder to say, I'm part of the problem and I need to do my part to fix this. It's much harder, especially once, Donald Trump is no longer in office. It's going to be much harder to shift the blame off of ourselves and onto someone else. I think that Donald Trump is rightly blamed for a lot of things. But the reality is he didn't get there on his own. He didn't just happen, And I have to look at what role I had, if any, in getting him there. And what role I have, if any, in preventing this from happening again. Because Donald Trump can go. The people who fall at his feet can lose their idol to worship. But the circumstances that created him and made it possible for him to do what he did are still going to be there, even after he's gone. And the only way to prevent something like this from happening again is to get honest about how this happened in the first place. And I think that is one gift that 2020 gave us, is a gift of clarity like we've never had before. Because you can't look at what happened this year on so many fronts and think, well, it's all because of Donald Trump, or, it's all because of one group of people. It's not. There are a lot of things going on that created the situations that we're facing this year and that we'll be facing next year too. Hopefully in smaller degrees, as people learn to take responsibility for the changes they want to see. We cannot look to anyone, any politician, any preacher, any social media personality, anyone, to fix this for us. We each have to do our part. And I think that 2020 has given us that gift as well, in that we are more aware than ever, perhaps. And when I say we, I hate to continue doing this, but I do think it's important to specify I'm talking about a lot of white people, because communities of color have long understood, it seems, that their role in securing justice, it's very personal. And it is important to be the change that they want to see in the world. I think that 2020, for a lot of us who have lived a life of privilege because of the color of our skin, are just waking up, or if not just waking up to it, just becoming that much more aware of how the decisions that we make and how we choose to confront these inequities that we see, and how we choose to deal with you know, the Trump cult and so forth, it reaches beyond ourselves, and we do have a responsibility to respond to it in such a way that it benefits the community we're a part of, not just our own personal interests, and we don't just get mad when it touches our lives personally. And when we're mad, we don't just stay mad. We do what we can to address the situation and make things better. And as much as 2020 has absolutely, for lack of a better word, sucked, I do think that is a gift. I do think that learning that we have a responsibility to each other is maybe a lesson a lot of us needed. And we're still going to be learning it through 2021, because the things that are happening right now that are putting us in the position of recognizing our vulnerability and our responsibility to each other, they're not just going to go away because January 1st rolls around. So if you haven't fully grasped the lesson yet, you still have time, which can be good news or bad news, depending on how you look at it. All right, I'm going to finish up my face and then come back with a few final thoughts. So hang on, and yeah, I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. I wanted to try something different today, and I love it. Although, like, even when I had hair, I never had bangs, and like, I get why, I remember why, but anyway, I still like it. It's so shiny and purpley. But I wanted to end this video on a more positive note. There are a lot of things about 2020 that we could complain about all day long, and it could last several videos. We learned a lot about the selfishness of people. We learned a lot about people who are willing to let other people die just so that they can get a haircut or go out to see a movie or have dinner at a restaurant. We just learned a lot of really ugly things about people's racism. We found out that a lot of the people that we didn't realize were racist were actually extremely racist. And there's just a lot that we learned about in 2020 that came as a surprise to some of us. So we could go on and on about that. But what I want to end with is other things that we learned about people. We learned that for every person who refuses to wear a mask, there are many, many more who will wear masks to protect their community and to protect their families. We learned that for every person who wants to dismiss racism as a non-issue, there are also a lot of people who recognize that it's a very serious issue and it's not going away and it needs to be dealt with honestly. For every person who thinks it's okay to let poor people starve or go homeless or struggle along during this difficult time, there are a lot of other people who recognize that being poor does not mean you deserve to starve or be out on the streets or, you know, for not have gifts for your kids for the holidays and so forth. And people are willing to come together to take care of each other. And I've seen that over and over again through this year, people coming together to take care of each other, sometimes taking care of people they don't even know, and doing it just because it's the right thing to do, not because they expect any kind of a reward for it, not because they are looking for accolades on social media, but just because it's the right thing to do. And more I'm seeing the truth of the thought that poor people know how to take care of each other, you know. And it sounds so weird to say that, but you know, because I think people a lot of times look to wealth and status and so forth to you know, provide a safety net. And there is a lot that could be said for making sure that people who are obscenely wealthy are paying their fair share of taxes and so forth. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about, apart from any government intervention, again and again, I've seen people who know what it's like to have little or nothing be the first ones to step up and come together to help people who are struggling. I've seen it over and over again my whole life, but especially this year, I've seen people, you know, people who have so very little coming together to help someone just because it's a person in need. And I think that is also a gift that 2020 gave us, is recognizing, you know, when we come together to do something, when we pool our resources together, we can actually accomplish a lot, even if we're each just giving a little bit. And I also think that 2020 gave us the gift of slowing down and resting, which is something that as Americans, we're not very good at doing. We live in a society that constantly tells us that our life has to be go, 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 and if it's not, then we're doing something wrong. And I think that 2020 gave us a much needed pause and didn't really give us a lot of choice in the matter. We had to slow down. And that was a gift that some people really needed. They needed permission to slow down. They needed someone to say it's okay to rest. And I think 2020 gave us that. And I really hope that people are really taking advantage of that, because someday life is going to pick back up again. I don't think we're ever going to go back entirely to the way things were before the pandemic, but I know that life is not always going to be what it is right now, and things are going to pick up again, and life is going to get ridiculously busy again. So I hope that you're taking advantage of this time to rest and to enjoy the quiet, because we could complain about it all day long, but that's not going to necessarily change is not necessarily going to change anything. So I hope you're making the most of the situation right as it is right now, instead of spending a lot of time wishing it could be different. And I know that's not easy to do. Believe me, I know that. But I hope that you're finding a way, like I'm finding a way through these bangs. So anyway, I hope that the rest of your day goes very well. I hope the last few days of this year go very well for you and give you some I hope they bring you wonderful surprises, some wonderful bits of good news that we can all use right now. And for those of you who have experienced losses, just know that, you are loved and you are not alone. And even though not all of us can necessarily relate directly to the losses you've experienced this year, there are people out there who are supporting you in your grief and in your mourning. And we're just there to offer presence and peace. And I hope that 2021 brings you better things. Enjoy the last few days of this year. Make the most of it. I will see you in January. Be good to yourselves. Be good to each other. Don't shit on yourselves or anyone else. And if you would like to support future content, there are multiple ways to do that, and I've listed that in the description. Thanks so much for all your support this year, for just being the awesome people that you are. And I hope that I've made your life better and brighter with these videos. Even when I get on political rants. All right, I'll talk to you again in January. Bye.